Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today's episode, one of my favorite topics because it's a dear one to my heart, and that is robotics. I'm joined today by Dr. Todd Wilson, who's the Chief Medical Officer of a company that I've been following for a number of years called EndoQuest's Robotics. They are essentially the world's first flexible robotic surgery system. Their whole goal is enabling better endoluminal and single incision surgery. Really excited to have you on the show, Dr. Wilson. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
Oh, phenomenal. And it's a pleasure to be on the show. Appreciate the
Totally.
opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'm personally was really excited having you on the show just because flexible robotics I think is a really exciting area. The only problem is that it's really difficult. EndoQuest has been one of the ones that has been successful in lasting for a certain amount of time. And you guys had some really exciting news clinically, which is why I wanted to have you on the show to announce that. But for those listeners and maybe investors or clinicians who don't know about EndoQuest, what is EndoQuest specifically? What's the main problem you're solving?
Well, EndoQuest itself is trying to solve the problem of enabling therapeutic endoscopy. And what that is that when we use endoscopes, that could be through the mouth or through the anus, such as a colonoscopy, there are a number of things that we can do with the scopes that we have. And what we have found is that we can actually do quite a few very significant things that can take the place of typical general surgery cases. And some of that includes things like the treatment of achalasia with a procedure that was started in 2008 called the POEM. And it replaces a general surgery procedure called the Heller myotomy. The beautiful thing about it is it does that same procedure without any incisions at all, and that ultimately has created a procedure that has fewer complications, which is better for patients, better for surgeons. And they're doing this with a device that was literally designed about 50 years ago. And this endoscope has not changed at all. And when we do these technically sophisticated procedures, we're doing it with a single instrument that we're kind of waving around with this very antiquated device. What we're doing is trying to enable that clinician by, instead of waving a single device or a single instrument, give the clinician two hands so that we can use basic surgical technique right at the target, with an overall goal of trying to take some of those general surgery cases that we do and convert them to completely scar-free endoluminal and incisionless surgeries.
Got it. And the way that it when you go transorally through, let's say, the trachea, I think what's interesting is that today when you do endoscopy, it's ergonomically doesn't, not very comfortable because you have one hand that's, dealing with the endoscope, another hand maybe is at least holding the intubation device, and then you're looking up on the screen. Is that correct?
And it gets even worse because you're also manipulating instruments through that endoscope. So you have to take your hand off of one component in order to manipulate the other. And then in order to turn it the direction that you need, you ultimately end up turning your body in order to get the torque, is what we call it, to achieve that angle. And that means that you may be facing the opposite direction of the screen that you're trying to look at in order to do this really sophisticated procedure. So from an ergonomic perspective, I don't think there's anything worse in medicine.
Yeah, it doesn't look very comfortable. And by the way, just, we kind of, I jumped over it, but for listeners, aside from being the CMO of EndoQuest, you are still practicing clinically. I think you train residents and everything as well, correct?
I do. I'm a general surgeon with a subspecialty of MIS surgery with a focus on both robotics and therapeutic endoscopy. And really, through training, you really learn the limitations of the devices that you use. And fundamentally, if you can make it easier for trainees to learn, it should be better for everybody. Now, my overall clinical practice has decreased over time as I've dedicated more time to the device company. But I think we're making a big difference. And ultimately, I think this is where I'm going to end up doing most of my work.
Fantastic. And probably, have an impact that really scales across patient populations. I think that's one of the exciting things about being in our industry is that when you have a piece of technology that solves a really big problem, you just have massive impact at scale. On the endoscopy side, though, I think, and I wonder if you would agree with this as a clinician, that, if you look at the last 2 or 3 decades, at least here in the United States, BMIs have risen. So there's more obese patients, more comorbidities. And so the procedures that general surgeons have been normally trained on from, let's say, even 10 or 20 years ago, which were not as minimally invasive as they are today, you're dealing with a more technically challenging approach. So again, smaller incisions, smaller spaces, etc., and a more anatomically challenging patient. Would you agree with that?
I think in general, there's a few, extra challenges. Not only is it the obesity, but also an aging population where I think anything that you can do to reduce the potential harm to the patient by reducing the complication rate is going to be a huge advantage. So I do agree with that. I do think that it does, I think, mean that less is better for the patient.
And with if you contrast the new solution, this new approach for endoscopy compared to what's the status quo today, aside from the ergonomic improvement, which obviously is going to translate to better performance and essentially outcomes, is the procedure also, if you standardize it overall, like more efficient? If you take this flexible robotics approach, what does that look like when you compare the two?
I think that's a great question. Efficient is a good way to kind of think about it, and a good procedure that I think we can focus on is a procedure called the ESD, or the endoscopic submucosal dissection. And what that is that if somebody does a colonoscopy and they identify a large polyp, the best solution for that patient is to remove the polyp entirely. We don't want any positive margins. We don't want any cells to be left behind that could ultimately recur, because any polyp will, if given time, turn into a cancer. And right now, the options are you can kind of snare it out piecemeal. It's not really optimal. Chances of recurrence are pretty high. Or you can do a colectomy. And for patients, that could be a pretty big operation. Usually, when they go to do a colectomy, they're doing a full cancer operation, removing 1/3 of the colon. And the complication rates for that can be upwards of 10 to 20%. But there's something in between, that endoscopic submucosal dissection, which right now is so difficult. The learning curve is somewhere around 350 to 450 cases until physician becomes proficient at it, and people just don't go through that learning curve. So when we look at people who need ESDs, less than 1% are actually getting them. They're getting one of those two other options, the substandard, snare, or they're getting an over-the-top cancer procedure with removal of the colon. But even for those people who are out there, the super experts who are doing a lot of these ESDs, when we compare a robotic surgeon doing the same ESD to the conventional ultra expert with over 1,000 cases, we're seeing that the case is done in half the time. So efficiency is something that I think is a given, and I think it's just natural. If you give somebody 2 hands when they're used to using 1 hand, they're going to operate better and faster, safer. Overall, it's just going to be better for the patient and for the surgeon.
Got it. And to date, do you have like a rough number? Like how many of these procedures, ESD procedures, are done roughly just in the United States on an annual basis? And what could it be if you essentially use technology to enable more surgeons to do it?
Hey everybody, quick break. If you're a MedTech CEO or a product leader, you're going to want to listen to this. I want you to imagine you're about to have a product launch. You've poured your time, your budget, your reputation into a device you're about to launch. And after all of that effort, your FDA submission, poof, gets rejected because of cybersecurity. This sounds dramatic, but it's actually not. It happens all the time to medtech companies, especially, recently with everything being digitized. This happens so often because medtech companies treat cybersecurity as a checkbox when it's now a non-negotiable design pillar. The FDA's 2023 guidance didn't suggest cybersecurity, it demanded it. So if you're not ready with threat modeling, penetration testing, SBOM management, incident response, and airtight documentation, you're not launching, period. And here's what most entrepreneurs don't realize. Scrambling to fix these issues last minute can cost over $250,000 and delay your launch by months, which imagine the investment of getting delayed, right? The more you spend time in review limbo with the FDA is lost revenue, lost market share, and lost investor confidence. And yet, so many founders and entrepreneurs I talk to, they still treat cybersecurity as a postscript instead of a strategic advantage. Now, I've held off bringing this to my audience as a topic until now because there just wasn't a medtech focused cybersecurity firm that I trusted. And that changed when I found Blue Goat Cyber. They specialize exclusively in medtech cybersecurity. They've helped companies like bioMaru, Inogen, Natera, along with nimble startups to get to market faster with a 100% FDA success rate. I had the chance to meet the founder, Christian Espinosa, and his story really resonated with me. So after he sold his first cybersecurity company, Alpine Security, Christian actually faced a personal health crisis. He ended up in the hospital, and that moment made him realize how vital and vulnerable medical devices really are because a medical device saved his life. So he built Blue Goat to serve medtech CEOs and founders just like you. Whether you're pre-revenue or scaling fast, Blue Goat can offer fixed-free pricing, unlimited retests, and no surprises. This isn't bolt-on security. This is built in from day one. You wouldn't launch a device that hasn't been clinically validated, so why would you risk launching one that's vulnerable to attack? Blue Goat will secure your device, simplify your submission, accelerate your approval, and they'll do it in a way that fits your budget, your timeline, and your team. So here's what I want you to do next. Go to bluegoatcyber.com, schedule a discovery call. They do these amazing calls. They'll do an analysis with you, educate you more, because the cost of waiting could be everything that you've worked for. So that being said, go to bluegoatcyber.com and schedule that call now. Let's get back to the episode.
If you look at the current potential market, if you use the most conservative means, which are lesions over 20 millimeters, it's going to be about 120,000 on the conservative side every year in the United States. We'll probably see less than 2,000 that are being done. I mean, and that gap exists because it's too hard to do with the technology that we have.
Interesting.
And then if you actually take that to the next level and start expanding the indications, if you go all the way to 10 millimeter lesions, then it's somewhere around 1.5 million cases per year. And I think that ultimately we'll land somewhere in between there.
Got it. So it sounds like the ESD procedure on the endoscopy side for EndoQuest seems like a beachhead market for you in the same sense that radical prostatectomy was the thing that made intuitive. It was a very complex procedure that less than 1% of surgeons did. Intuitive came along and essentially democratized that and made it so that any surgeon can do this really complicated case. So would you agree with that analogy as it relates to EndoQuest?
I think it's a perfect analogy. And if you look at the numbers, it's even more significant for ESD. So at the time, the numbers for radical prostatectomy was somewhere around 60,000 cases per year. The number of cases done minimally invasively were very small in the single digit percentiles. And it really didn't move because the urologists were struggling with the technical requirements that were needed to do it laparoscopically. And when they found how to use the robot and enable that procedure, it took off. And it literally springboarded Intuitive to where it is now, because once they learned that they can enable something like that, then they figured out how they can enable other things. And now if you look at prostatectomy, over 95% of those cases are done robotically. ESD is the same, except the market is much bigger. And right. I think that what we think is that we're going to be even more enabling than what the robot was for prostatectomy.
Yeah, and just I mean, for context for the audience listening, I always talk about it because it's just really an amazing stat. But like Intuitive stock as of right now, which is we're February 26th, is at $206 billion. So they actually clocked the $200 billion mark. They're the second. They might be the largest med device company right now. I think it was them and Abbott. But as a result, like again, we talked about radical prostatectomy. There's this huge growth in intuitive. Last year, according to Perplexity, there were about 107,643 robotic assisted radical prostatectomies done. And then you have that large of a market cap. And what you're saying is that for EndoQuest with the ESD procedure, there's an even like a much larger market opportunity there in terms of being an enabling technology.
Yeah, we believe so.
That's amazing. Now, I do want to bring up the device and the technology so people can see it, and maybe kind of walk us through like a few key features. And then I do want to talk about the exciting news you guys have on the clinical side.
All right, everyone, quick commercial break. If you're a MedTech CEO/founder, or maybe you're a sales or marketing leader at a startup or a scale up, you're going to want to listen to this. Are you struggling to get in front of your ideal audience, whether that's investors or perhaps clinicians who want to adopt your product? Maybe you're getting ghosted. You send emails and messages and nothing comes back, nothing happens, right? Or worse, nobody knows who you are, right? In business, visibility is everything. And I always tell people, if you want to persuade before persuasion can happen, you have to learn how to get attention. So if your sales team is desperate for traction, clinicians don't know your name, investors have never heard of you, you're losing opportunities every day. And that needs to change now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. That's where my company, Khateeb & Co. comes in. We don't just do marketing, we do growth. We figure out how to engineer markets by creating magnetic messaging that makes you impossible to ignore. And we build high impact strategies, of course, using social media, but other channels such as email, text, and others to help turn content and messaging into commercial pipeline, and it leads into closed deals. As an example, we worked with a surgical robotics company in raising a $31 million Series A, and then they needed help on their pre-market release. So we packed their CRM with 198 surgeon leads and nurtured them down. That ended up becoming 4 closed hospitals. 4 hospitals closed and adopted this technology within a period of 6 months, and they got 2 great key opinion leaders in the process. So whether you're a startup founder wearing too many hats, or maybe you have a marketing team that's just spread too thin and they don't have the expertise, my team and I plug in and partner up with your company, and we amplify your reach. From crafting powerful sales scripts to optimizing your team's demo calls, creating content, having it go out on a consistent basis, we transform your outreach into a growth engine. So if you're ready to dominate your market, you're ready to become a known name and people to know of you and take your calls and take your meetings, I want you to act right now. Don't wait anymore, because you've already wasted plenty of time. Go to growmymedtech.com. That's growmymedtech.com. And I want you to schedule a quick call. My team and I will give you a free analysis with 2 to 3 actionable ideas. There's no strings attached. And if we're a fit, great. We can get partnered up and we can help you go to the next level. And if not, look, the ideas are always free. So do not wait and don't waste any more time. Go to growmymedtech.com right now, and let's make you the go-to name in your niche. Now, let's get back to the episode.
So if you can just kind of walk us through what we're looking at here, and I think maybe the first thing we should start at, I know we have the patient card. Let's start at the physician console, because that's essentially where a lot of this will begin. Let's kind of talk us through like the physician console and why this is important.
So what we're doing with robotics is essentially putting software in between the end effector and the controller. And what that allows us to do is compensate for the challenges that might arise from different angles, and essentially enhance the user's ability to do basic surgical technique. Here we've chosen an open concept so that you're at one, you can look around the operating room and talk to your team. But it's a little bit different than what other physicians might be used to, in that there's a lot of information on this. It's more like kind of sitting down in the seat of the cockpit of a jet fighter.
I was going to say that. Is there a reason why you went with for those who don't see it, so essentially it's a console like you would see like a Da Vinci would have, or any other robotic system, soft tissues robotic system, but instead of having to put your face into like 2 binoculars, or I don't know what they're called, you're seeing essentially a very nice like flat screen monitor. So the reason for that is just because of the amount of information that you need to display.
Well, I think it's really for ergonomics. One thing that we know with good ergonomics is you need the ability to move around, adjust yourself, and make those adjustments on a frequent basis. And having an open console allows for that. With the technology that we have now with 3D screens, the need for a periscope is not as important as it was when the Da Vinci was first made. So this can adapt to 2D and 3D, and it can be done with very simple glasses or no glasses at all.
And what's nice about this is that I'm a big believer that when it comes to really good UX and UI, if there's something that already exists, you're better off taking that and even iterating it a little bit versus coming up with something completely different, because that just adds a barrier for adoption. So I like that you have a console that actually looks familiar to people. Let me jump over to the patient cart, which is where all the all the cool stuff on the robotic side is. But yeah, tell us how the system's designed and what we're looking at here.
So the system's designed really to be able to drive that endoscope. So this would be the equivalent of your EGD or your colonoscope. And through that, it's going to be able to drive two independent, completely separate instruments that you can actually control from the patient, you can control it from the physician console. And you have an independent camera that you can drive independently from the patient or the physician console. When you look at this here, all of that's being driven from that very top part. That patient cart that's below it, we have two different versions. This is the version that we're currently using, and then there's a smaller version. It's about the size of a wheelchair. It actually has a lot of capabilities to it, but that's going to be used for endoscopic suites and smaller operating rooms, maybe in a surgery center and that kind of thing.
Fantastic. And then the last thing, is on the instruments. The instruments I found pretty interesting because they're multi-jointed, but it's also a little bit about the flexible instruments and if you're able to, maybe how the economics work out for the hospital. Are these reusable? What does that all look like?
So there's a few components to this. In order to really enable people inside the lumen of the GI tract, we need to do a few things. First, give them two hands. That's a huge jump right there. But to be able to achieve things like tension and countertension requires us to be able to triangulate and spread. That means two joints is really the most beneficial way to approach that. And so here you have a full 7 degrees of freedom when it comes to each of the instruments. The instruments are exchangeable so that you can use the typical things that you would use in an operating room, like pinching forceps, needle drivers, monopolar instrument scissors. And you can do it with the forces that you would need to achieve anything inside the GI tract. So it's pretty enabling. It will allow you to do anything that you would typically do. That's cutting, taking care of, potential bleeding, achieving hemostasis, closing tissue. It's all capable with these instruments.
Got it. Let me stop sharing there and, kind of use that as a segue into some of the exciting news that you guys have now with the clinical news. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Well, we do have a bit of experience with our original generation. And we have 44 in-human patients that we've done. That was our proof of concept that we can actually enable the beachhead. And during that, we actually showed that we can improve efficacy. We can improve our zero resection rates. We can improve the ability to completely remove lesions from the colon. And we can do that with fewer complications than what's published in the literature. So it was a huge benefit to us. We learned a lot from all of those patients. And then we went on and developed our next generation, fully ground up solution, using what we learned there and continuing our effort to iterate and improve on our ability to give people really good quality, precision, and accuracy, despite the flexibility of the instruments, which creates its own, technical challenges. But over the years that we've been working on this, we've been able to come up with several breakthroughs that have really helped enable that. Now, we have created that next generation. We have gotten through all of the processes, including our animal trial. We took some very specific data that we had from some great studies, including a randomized control trial with the Harvard University, where we showed that novices actually pick this up much faster with a robot than they do with conventional means.
Why is
We got. I think that it's a couple things. One, you're giving people two hands, and the interesting thing is that we did this with endoscopists. So these are people with like hundreds of actual endoscopy cases, zero robotic experience, and then we compared them learning the conventional means compared to learning the robotic ESD technique. And even with that background that they had, they were able to pick up the robotic technique much faster. It's less stress. It gives them the opportunity to create tension and counter tension, which enables the procedure. So I think those two things are the most important. But overall, it was a huge difference, statistically difference in decreasing defects, perforations, decreasing accidental injury to the muscle, and the overall time was faster. But it ultimately showed that it was superior in the learning phase for novices than the conventional learning phase. And that got us approved for the FDA SAFE program. And
that's
huge.
fantastic. Tell the audience, especially the investors, what is the SAFE program? Why is that meaningful?
Well, it's similar to the breakthrough, but what it indicates is that we have clear evidence that we can do something that overall moves the needle as far as safety for a procedure. And we're the only robotic program that I know of that's actually been accepted to that SAFE program. It is very beneficial to us because it gives us a direct line to the FDA. We've been able to get questions answered. Our FDA experience has been fantastic. The team has been responsive, but ultimately we were able to continue to move down that progress with animal trials that went absolutely beautifully, and then ultimately submitted for our FDA IDE, which got approved. And very soon, that's a huge win for us. We're super excited about it, and clinical trials will be actually starting here very soon.
That's fantastic. So what are some of the big KPIs and goals that you guys have for the rest of the year? And also, can clinicians or investors find you at any upcoming conferences?
We'll be at LSI, which is upcoming here in
greatest event of the year, man. I love LSI.
LSI is fantastic. We also have SRS, which, for robotic companies, that is an amazing conference as well. That's going to be held
in Strasbourg this year, I think, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We actually have a permanent installation as a clinical development center at ERCAD in Strasbourg, France. So we've done a lot of work there to understand how do we train surgeons and gastroenterologists, and we've also done procedure development. It's been a fantastic place to work with all of the clinicians who go through that facility. It's given us exposure that we wouldn't otherwise get, and the feedback is amazing.
That's fantastic.
As far as our goals are going to be, let's get this clinical trial done. Let's show what we can do. I'm confident that we're going to be able to show that we're going to make a big difference. We're going to move the needle as far as efficacy for the ESD. I truly believe the technology is going to probably make a bigger difference in the learning curve for a procedure than any device that we've seen in decades. The evidence that we have so far supports that. I think it's going to continue, so I'm pretty excited about it.
That's wonderful. And for the clinicians who are watching, I mean, conservative, I'm not going to hold you to this. I don't want your quality and regulatory to get upset with you. But like, when could a clinician expect to see you guys be commercially available for them to get their hands on it and potentially introduce it to their clinical practice in hospital?
Conservatively speaking, not soon enough.
Not soon. Okay. All right. I won't push it. But I think it's good, and especially for the for any clinicians who are attending those conferences, they can check you out. And by the way, I want to encourage everyone to go check out the website because there's a lot of good content there, and they can stay up to date with you. That's EndoQuestRobotics.com. And Dr. Wilson, before we kind of sign off, any other sort of closing thoughts on EndoQuest and things that people should keep an eye out for?
I as far as EndoQuest, I like where we're at right now. And the truth is the interest is extremely high. I haven't seen this much excitement, I think, in a long time. I think people are seeing that this differentiates itself from other platforms and that It's really the only fully endoluminal robotic platform that there is. There's no real competition at the moment. I think we have a real lead and advantage over the other robotic companies that are even entertaining the space. So I'm happy where we're at. The excitement that it's generated has, I think, kind of invigorated the company, and I think we're going to see really, really great things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm excited for you guys. I've been following you for a while, so it's exciting to hear all these great milestones that you're hitting. I'll be looking forward to sort of following you along for the rest of the year. For those who are listening again, I want to remind you, go to EndoQuestRobotics.com to learn more. I'm your host, Omar Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time.